order to serve certain religious theories that they had founded, because religion and nature were very much correlated in ancient Egypt. Next, please. These are the very early Egyptian burials. Starting like 8,000 years ago, the Egyptians buried their dead as such. When they formed those small agricultural societies, they saw around them many natural phenomena that were repeated all the time. By excellence, most importantly was the sun. As we said, every day it was born in the east and it sunk in the west. The river Nile with its flood, the moon with its cycle, they started to believe that after their death, they will be resurrected again into another life. And in order to be able to live once again, they had to have their bodies intact. So they started to bury their dead. It was a pit in the sand. It will always be in a fetal position, just like a fetus in the tummy of his mommy. You can see in that picture here, he will be kneeling or sleeping on one of his sides, probably by convenience, head to the west. You can see the arrow directing towards the north. So he will be looking to the west in order to follow the sun god Ra, that will take him to a life of eternity. And together with him will be a few objects of usage in the afterlife, such as jewelry, tools, some grains to feed upon, and so on. Because it was a shallow pit, exposed to the sun, close to the sun, and in the sand that was very dry, the bodies were automatically mummified, you can say petrified. So it was okay, but they noticed that the jackals and the hyenas would come and dig in the ground and eat the corpses that were buried. So eventually they will starting the first dynasty. I'm going to show you a picture of the first burials of the pharaohs, and I'll explain to you what the dynasties are all about. They started to bury their dead in shafts carved in the bedrock 20 and 30 meters deep. And because they were away from the sun, and not in the dry sand, they used to rot. They noticed that and they started to practice artificial mummification. That we're going to talk about, sure, in one of those, explicitly in one of those lectures, inshallah. Next, please. Can we see the next? That's the palette of Narmer. That's the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, Narmer Mina, that's his name. And actually, I need to explain to you what our dynasty is all about, and thus give you an idea about the ancient Egyptian history. The ancient Egyptian history starts with the first dynasty. We always studied that it started with the first dynasty, that the unity of North and South took place. Now we have proof that the North and South took place hundreds of years before the first dynasty. It is just that the writing was not developed yet in order to leave us those understandable texts telling us this pharaoh did this and that and so on. This is why when we started to find proof that the unity took place before the first dynasty, now we have the dynasty 0 as well. That history, ancient Egyptian history, that starts around 3100 BC, it ends with the conquest of Alexander the Great in the year 332 BC, starting a new era of our history, the ancient, the Greco-Roman history in Egypt. What we see in front of us here is the pharaoh. This pharaoh came from the south. As we said, the south was more developed, more advanced than the north. You can see the first register has the name of the pharaoh in the middle between the two representation of the cows. And the cow is the goddess Hathor. She's the goddess of the beauty, maternity, love, and peace, and music. She is the one who, according to the most important legend in our history, in our culture, took care of the legitimate heir to the throne and protected him. So she does the same thing for the pharaoh that appears on this palette. The pharaoh is wearing the high domed white crown of the north, of the south, sorry. Before the first unity that took place, the pharaoh of the south had a high domed white crown that you see on the picture to the left, and that of the north had a curled high red crown that you see on the picture in the second register of the picture to the right. So every pharaoh who ruled on Egypt united had to show himself with the crown of the north and the crown of the south in order to prove and assure that he is ruling on a united Egypt, there is no war, there is stability and prosperity, because there must have been a long, ferocious war before that unity that took place. Behind his pharaoh, you can see his sandal bearer. He's holding the sandal of his master on one hand, and on the other hand, he has a jar filled with water in order to wash the feet of his master whenever necessary, that is to say, before he goes inside the sacred places. According to the most important legend, the legend of Isis and Osiris, that I'll give you an idea about throughout our history, our lecture, the falcon god was the legitimate heir to the throne. So you can see him to the right, the extreme right. He's standing on top of the papyrus plant. The papyrus plant used to grow enormously in the marshes of Delta, so it became the emblem of the north. So the pharaoh, King Narmer, is crushing with his feet the papyrus plant, the emblem of the north, subjugating the North people, and he is holding an enemy by a rope that goes through the nose, another sign of subjugation. The pharaoh is holding a mace head in one hand, and in the other hand, a lock of hair to the forehead of another enemy, an enemy of the north, with the name of the province or the state where he came from written at the back of his head. Documentation was something very important to the Egyptians. They were very rigorous with regard to every single detail. Finally, the lowest more register, you can see two enemies fleeing away from the power of the pharaoh in state of movement, and the name of the provinces written in front of their heads. On the other side, which is actually the recto, we just finished the verso here, because this is the main piece. You can see a circle in the middle. This circle is upon which they used to put, because those pellets were used to grind the malachite for the eye kohl, which was very important, not only as makeup, but also to reflect the very strong sunlight. For an ordinary people, you will just have a piece of person, you will have a piece of stone, but for the pharaoh, it is elaborate piece commemorating his most important deeds. The first register, we have the same thing that we had on the first panel, and then you can see the pharaoh, in front of him standard bearers holding different emblems that were important for the Egyptians. In the third register, you have those two panthers being tied together according to some scholars and being torn away from each other according to other scholars by two human figures. And again, this is symbolic of the struggle that took place between the north and the south that ended with the unity. In the final register, you can see the pharaoh as the sacred bull, strong bull, crushing his enemy after he has destroyed his castle that was underneath. So again, this is the beginning of our history, King Narmer, first dynasty. Next, please, Ophir, can we have the next picture? Okay, this is the Simatawi, or the union of the two lands. There must have been a very difficult time before the unity, because all through our history, even through the Greco-Roman era, the pharaoh had to show himself as the uniter of the north and the south, the keeper of stability. So what do we have here? We have Horus, the falcon god, and Set to the other side. Let me give you a brief account on that legend that involves Horus and Set. It says that the god Osiris that we see in one of those pictures, who was the first human being to be created, he ruled over everybody, and Set, the one that you see with the jackal head to the right side, his brother was jealous. Very much like the story of Abel and Cain, he kills his brother and he cuts his body into 16 pieces, scatters them all around the river Nile in different provinces. But Isis, his wife, regroups the pieces together and gives her husband the breath of life just for one night when Horus the falcon was conceived. The idea behind it, actually, the Egyptian priests were very clever. You needed to form some kind of unity between the Egyptians, the provinces themselves. So 16 amongst the most 16 provinces of Egypt, each one of them held one piece, actually 15, because the phallus was lost and eaten by a catfish never found. So 15 provinces contained or housed the parts of the body of Osiris. This helped unite all Egypt together. When we started our civilization, there was a parallel civilization even more advanced than ours in certain aspects in Sudan. We continued to evolve and they stopped. You know why? Just because we attained political unity, and the political unity was due to the very strong religious beliefs that were forged by the priests who were the politicians at the same time. So what do we see in front of us? Although they are enemies, the rivals, Horus and Set, the Egyptians believed that the good always existed with the evil on its side. It was all about cycles, the good and the bad. You cannot know one thing, recognize one thing, except with having its opposite right in front of you. So both Horus and Set are tying both plants. Can you see to the left, there is the papyrus plant, the emblem of the north, and to the right, there is the lotus plant, the emblem of the south. They are both being tied in the knot in the center around the esophagus and the lung of the pharaoh. They're even both pushing with their feet in order to very strongly tie the knot and keep the unity of the north and the south. And concerning the lungs and the esophagus of the pharaoh, it's their way to say that through his breath of life, through his existence, the pharaoh keeps the north and the south united. Up on top of the esophagus, you can see the name of the pharaoh written in what we call cartouche. Actually, cartouche is French for cartilage. It is the soldiers of Napoleon Bonaparte, the great French president and army general who invaded Egypt at the end of the 18th century. His soldiers went all through Egypt. Everywhere in the temples, they saw that oblong shape in which the name of the pharaoh were written. They reminded them of the cartouches, of the cartridges of their guns, so they called them cartouche, and all the Egyptologists actually used the very same term to write that shape in which the name of the pharaoh was written. But what was this cartouche? Actually, it is what the Egyptians called shen. Shen is a circle. The circle evoked eternity. You can go in circles forever. So it's just on the baseline of the horizon, the abstract. You have the name of the pharaoh written in the shen, just elongated a little bit in order to be able to house it. And there you go, you're giving protection and eternity forever to the name of the pharaoh. Can we have the next picture, please, Ophir? This is the Serech. Serech means the facade of the royal palace. You know where the name pharaoh comes from? It's Greek for Pera. Pera is the great house. It's the person who resides in the biggest house of the city. Just like you refer to your president now and say the White House announced, the White House did this and that. So to them, it was the great house, or the person that resided in the greatest house of them all. And because every pharaoh was equated with Horus, son of Isis and Osiris, the legitimate heir to the throne, you see Horus on top of his house. And that's the name of the pharaoh Jet, one of the pharaohs of the first dynasty, written inside the representation of the panels of the that decorate the facade of the palace. The name Jet is written here as a serpent, and actually in the ancient Egyptian language, and I would really love to consecrate one of those lectures to the language and explain to you how does it go. We have biliteral signs, that is to say a certain sign. Serpent here will be pronounced jet. So if you have a word, for example, that is ship jet, you will write ship and then you will write jet, and that's the name of the pharaoh that is written inside here, written by using. So this is phonetic, and this is not ideogram. This is a phonetic sign, just like the alphabet. Can you see we see the next one, please, Ophir? Well, that history, how do we know now about the history of ancient Egypt? Because the many texts that they left us, whether like this one on the wall of the temple of Seti I in Abydos, the list of the pharaohs. We have it on papyrus, we have it on pieces of stone. And let me tell you that when we talk about the dynasties, the ancient Egyptians, like all Oriental cultures, actually, when they wrote down their history, they did not choose a certain line or a certain point to start their history after. Like today we say BC, before it was the foundation of Rome. When they wrote history, it was always in relation to the reign of such and such pharaoh. So this history would always say, for example, on the first day of the second month of the inundation, of the 5th year of his reign, His Majesty took his troops to go and conquer the nomads of Sinai, for example. And when another pharaoh comes to reign, they will start at zero. They will start a whole new history then. The ancestor cult was very important, not only for pharaohs, but also for Egyptian normal commoners. Here you see Seti I. On top of his head, there is the sun god. The sun god is flanked to both sides by the protective goddess of the north, the cobra, Wadjet. Each one is wearing, to the right, to the left, Wadjet, the cobra, is wearing the red crown. To the left, she is wearing the white crown. The pharaoh himself is holding an incense bearer in his hand, and he is pointing toward his ancestors, teaching his son, Ramses II, in front of him, about the history of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. Because it's his son, you can see an adolescent, maybe even a child, he has a lock of hair to the side. That's the way the ancient Egyptians kept their children, to make sure the hair is, to maintain the cleanliness of the hair. A lock will be braided and the rest will be shaved. And the child is holding in both hands rolls of papyrus in which the names of the pharaohs that are depicted on the wall, and I have the true picture of the temple right next to this one, but it's not as clear as this drawn image, so I'll show it to them. So he's actually showing him all about his ancestors to teach him his history and how a pharaoh should be. If we move to the next pharaoh, please, next picture, please, Ophir, you're going to see the real deal, the real picture. There it is, the scene that we just showed, the cartouches of the different pharaohs that preceded to Seti I and Ramses II. He's giving the heritage of his ancestors to his son to follow up his death. Can we move to the next one, please? Oh, this is the Isha tree. It is the sacred tree, just like the family tree of nowadays. We see the same pharaoh, Seti I. He's kneeling. He has the scepter in his hand. And one of the insignias of royalty is the scepter. It must be the sort of the stick of the very early herdsmen that remained with us all through our history. To his back, you can see an ibis-headed person. Actually, this is the god Tot. He's the god of writing, sciences, and the messenger of the gods. He has a pencil in his hand, and in that pencil in his hand, he is writing on one of the leaves of the Isha tree the cartouche of Seti I. And Seti I, while kneeling, he's actually holding his own cartouche, his name amongst the names of the other pharaohs on the walls of the temple. So he's like attesting his descendants from all the pharaohs that preceded his reign. Can we move to the next one, please? This is one of our pharaohs. He's performing the ritual of the Hebsed. The ancient Egyptians, this is 18th dynasty, like around 1300 BC, way after the beginning of our history, and yet the Egyptians were very much sticking to every tradition they knew very early in their history. Like, for example, in the beginning of our history, after the passage of 30 years of reign, the pharaoh had to show his subjects that he was still capable of ruling them. He would celebrate what the ancient Egyptians called Hebsed, the Jubilee festival. He will have to be in an open court. He will fight a strong bull. We believe that this bull would either be drugged by the priests, or it will be just a dummy doll bull, not to hurt the pharaoh, especially after 30 years of reign. He's probably not very young. So he will have to conquer this bull to prove his physical potency, and then he will have to run a race. When he runs the race, he is holding, you can see, a flail, another insignia of royalty, just maybe to chase away the insects. Also at the very beginning of our history, like with cavemen, he has a roll of papyrus in his other hand. This roll of papyrus is just like the one that Ramses II, the child, was holding in his hand. It is actually, in this case, a roll of papyrus in which the testimony of Geb, the god of earth, is giving him the rule on earth. To the ancient Egyptians, Egypt was the center of the world. Even when they started to make contact with other countries, it was only for commerce, maybe later to colonize them. But you see, they refer to different countries, foreign lands, as not of the creation of God. So they didn't really weigh in the balance to them. So the pharaoh, during that celebration of the Hebset, he's going to fight the bull and then run around the open court, touching its corners, and then saying a certain testimony where he announces that he rules upon the four corners. He touches the four corners of earth, upon which he rules according to the testimony of his father Geb. Once he finished with those rituals, what he's going to do, he's going to go and change in a pavilion. And maybe you remember, everybody who was with Skopje group with me last winter, he will go to the pavilion and then go to the Hebset court to make offerings to the gods, to receive respect from the rulers of the provinces, and then he will start another 30 years of rule to come. During later eras of our history, we will learn of such and such pharaoh celebrating his Hebset after the passage of 8 years, 20 years, excuse me, not necessarily 30 years. In other words, whenever he needed to prove to his subject that he was still capable of ruling them, whenever he needed a propaganda, sort of, because it was a kind of re-election for the pharaoh. Next one, please. This is the mastaba of Den. When we saw the early burial, a shallow pit in the ground, Egyptians became more and more developed and advanced. First thing that they did is that to keep away the harm of the savage animals, and here we're talking like some 4,000 or 500 or 5,000 years BC, actually they started to dig in the bedrock and bury their dead. This is one of the pharaohs Den. His name is Den, one of the pharaohs of the first dynasties, and this is his mastaba, in other words, tomb. It just lost its superstructure. It's the substructure that you see here. The superstructure will be made of a few rooms to keep the funerary furniture. It will be built out of mud brick, unfired mud brick, silt mixed with straw, to keep it uniform. And then the substructure that you see is where there will be a cavity dug in the bedrock and then surmounted with more mud brick in order to keep underneath this cavity or this shaft the sarcophagus of the pharaoh buried and protected forever. The tombs of the pharaohs of the first and second dynasties were built out of mud brick, unfired mud brick. And if we can move to the next one, please, Ophir. After 2 dynasties of burying our dead, almost 400 years of burying our dead in those mastaba, dead pharaohs, in those mastabas, all of a sudden we have a revolution in construction. This is the earliest construction in the history of man world made out of history of mankind made out of stone. This is the complex and the pyramid of King Zoser, the first pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty. Actually, it was built for him. The reason that is so great and so perfect, that he had a genius architect. His name was Imhotep, or he who comes in peace. We call him Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci of ancient Egypt because he was not just an architect, he was an astronomer, he was the prime minister, he was the secretary or the keeper of the seal of the pharaoh, the closest person next to him. And he was also a sculptor. He sculptured for his master the first life-size statue ever founded. So, and he was also the physician, the doctor of the court of the pharaoh. Actually, he was equated in later years or in later eras by the Greeks to the god of medicine, Asclepius. So this genius architect, he started as usual by building a mastaba, or a rectangular superstructure, for his master Zoser. And then he had this magnificent idea of surmounting the mastaba with smaller ones. Each one was being smaller than the other. It gave the whole construction, the whole tomb of the pharaoh, the step form that you see in front of us. He left us a note, he left us a document in which he said, "I built a staircase for the spirit of my master to ascend to heaven and unite with his ancestors." It was believed by the ancient Egyptians that when a pharaoh dies, he becomes a star. So he was supposed to go up those steps and unite with his ancestors. And the part that you see in front of the pyramid in front of us is where the remainder of the celebration of the Hapset feast will take place, in which he will make offerings to the divinities and then go and sit on the throne of the north, wear the crown of the north, and shift to the throne of the south and wear the crown of the south, and then he will receive all respect from the different rulers of the provinces. This complex was restored by Jean-Philippe Louer, the French archaeologist and architect at the same time, which was rare to find. So he was hired by the UNESCO in order to found the study, how to restore this complex. And he was really amazed when he came. It was a contract of 8 months, but he ended by living 60 years of his life restoring the complex of Zoser. He said, you would imagine that when man will start for the first time to build in stone, he will start with something humble, learn on the job, and eventually man will evolve. But we had nothing in stone before, and all of a sudden we had perfection. If we can shift to the other one, Ophir, please. The difference between the step pyramid of King Zoser and the perfect pyramid of Giza is actually less than 150 years. We find the pyramids of Giza taking the shape of a perfect pyramid simply because the cult of the sun god was becoming so powerful at the time. And let me tell you that every clergy, Egypt was divided at that era of our history. We're talking about 4th dynasty around the, and I forgot to tell you that the transition from one dynasty to another takes place in the most of the cases when the pharaoh dies and leaves no heir to the throne. The ancient Egyptians, like with the Jewish people, believed that the royal blood ran in the veins of the ladies. So if the pharaoh had a son with a concubine, he cannot become pharaoh because his mother was not of the royalty. In this case, some marriage will be arranged between maybe the son of the pharaoh of a concubine and his half-sister, or some princess from the royal house, or some influential male and some lady from the royal house. And in this case, we will start a whole new dynasty. In some rare cases, a dynasty will come to an end because of a revolution or because of foreign invasion, but these are very rare cases in general. So the clergy of the sun god Ra and every clergy in their temple would want to give themselves so much importance, because in this case, they will have all the power and all the riches, and the priests were always the politicians at the same time and the administrators. So we see them, the priest of the sun god Ra in Heliopolis, where the sun was venerated, we see them, they're trying to push their deity to become the most important, and they managed. So they forged this legend in which every pharaoh or every person will have to follow the sun god Ra. So they give the shape of the pyramids, the form of the rays, in order to be in the good graces of that god that will assure that the pharaoh will reach a life of eternity after his death, because he will be following the sun god Ra in the very same way it takes in order to start a new day. He will start a new day, a new life, once the sun god will rise every morning in the eastern sky. To the ancient Egyptians, the building of the pyramid was a national project, actually. People, once you start construction on the site, automatically you will have thousands of people working for you. Villages will be formed. There will be the bakers, the brewers, there will be the physicians on site, there will be a whole market. And the ancient Egyptians, actually the pharaohs, through the priests, managed to convince the ancient Egyptians that if the pharaoh arrives to a life of eternity, he will sort of guarantee or facilitate it, pave the way in front of all Egyptians. If we can move to the next picture, please, Ophir. This is the very famous triad, Osiris, the god that was first created, or the first human being to be created. So because he was actually the first to be created, he had, and the first ruler over Egypt, he has the scepter and the flail, both signs of and insignias of royalty in Egypt. He has a false beard. Why did the pharaohs wear a false beard? Actually, because and again, you can see how the Egyptians were so much sticking to everything that they knew, even as cavemen. When writing was not yet developed and the ancient Egyptians left us just a few inscriptions on the walls of the caves, to express themselves, a man with a beard was an adult, because little children could not have a beard, you see. So it became automatically a sign of wisdom. But with the development of this ancient Egyptian civilization, every pharaoh, because he was a high priest himself, the highest there is, had to be totally shaven. Shaving was a ritual of purification before you get in touch with the statues of the divinities, before you go into their sanctuaries. So he had to be shaved, the pharaoh, but he had to show his wisdom in certain occasions. So he will have a false beard that will be tied around his ear at the back of his neck. So you can see Osiris wearing the false beard with the scepter and the flail, and to his side there is his wife Isis. Isis here is assimilated with the goddess Hathor, the cow goddess, because the story goes, the legend says that after Osiris is being resurrected by his wife, just one night he's going to impregnate her with Horus, that child that you see on her lap, and then he will leave Earth in order to become the first dead, the god of the underworld. She will give birth to Horus. She will leave Horus in the care of the cow goddess Hathor and go and follow her husband. You can see sort of many deities incorporated here. You have the horns of the cow, the sun disk in between her horns, Isis herself with the wajib, the cobra, protecting her forehead, and Osiris to her side, and he also has the cobra protecting his forehead here. Let me tell you something. There was a multitude of gods, and in every temple, every clergy, according to them, it is their God who created everything, all the universe, and there was no contradiction whatsoever. On the contrary, in order for the ancient Egyptians to link between all those divinities, in other words, all those provinces or states and their people, they linked between different divinities and they merged them together. At the same time, they had a lot of festivities in which one divinity will have to go and meet with another one. This was some kind of their way in order to form a political unity between the different provinces of Egypt, and believe me, it worked. If we can move to the other one, please, Ophir. This is Horus, the falcon god, the legitimate heir to the throne. You can see him wearing the double crown. This is the pharaoh himself. He's holding on one hand the scepter of prosperity, which is Wasit, and by the way, it is the same name of Luxor, so Luxor means prosperity, and to the other side, you will see he's holding the Ankh sign, which is the sign of life. There's a lot of, when we are going, inshallah, to have one lecture to talk to you about hieroglyphs, I'm going to tell you that every sign evoke a certain idea or a certain sound because one thing or the other. For example, scholars try to understand why did they choose this sign that you have held here in the hand of the pharaoh, and by the way, you can see it up there. It's like a cross, but with a circle in the middle. Why did they choose this as the sign of life? There are two theories. One, it says that this is the uterus in the middle and the two ovaries to the side. And because mummification, they knew very well all about the inside of the human body. And another theory says that what you see as the Ankh started first as the sandal. Because when in their statuary, in their representation, when a person is moving, walking, that is to say, when he has his legs and feet separate from one another in a movement like walk like an Egyptian, it means he's alive. If he has the feet next to each other, then he's dead. We call it mummiform, that still fidget person. So these are the theories behind why did they choose this form in order to represent the sign of life. And the scene that we have in front of us here is a relief executed in what we call raised relief around the scene that you want to create. So it pops up through our lectures. Inshallah, we'll be evoking different kinds of art and the evolvement of this art as well, the art in ancient Egypt. If you can see the next one, please, Ophir. Can you see the next one? This is Sekhmet, the lioness. The ancient Egyptians, when they started their civilization, when they worshipped an entity, it was for one of two reasons. Either they were grateful for that entity, like the Nile with its flood, like the sun that gives them warmth and light, like the moon that lights their nights, or because they were afraid of that entity. Like Sekhmet, the goddess, we can see her here being represented. She's a lioness. She's the one responsible for starting epidemics and wars and putting an end to them. So you can see she's a very powerful goddess, and you can see her here again with the sun disk on top of her head and the cobra on her forehead. If we can move to the other one, please. Anubis the jackal, who they feared so much because he fed on the bodies that were being buried, guess what? He became the god of mummification and the necrophilia. Why? It's as though they're trying to tell him, you are supposed to protect the necrophilia where we bury our dead, protect the mummies of their dead. Please don't hurt them. You're supposed to be their guardian. So it so happened, it became that every mummifying priest had to wear a mask of Anubis while he performed the ritual of mummification. And mummification was simply a process of embalmment. The body would be embalmed dry by extracting all sorts of liquids and fluids from it. There are two theories. One of them says it took 40 years, and that's the more acceptable theory nowadays. Strabo, the Italian geograph, said 70 days, but it's rather 40 days that the mummification process took in order to render the corpses ready to be buried once and for all. So you can see here the god Anubis, the god of the afterlife, preparing the mummy of a pharaoh because he has the false beard, and this is actually the coffin, the mask that is covering the mummy that is wrapped with bandages. Those bandages will measure hundreds and hundreds of feet. Behind him, there is a hieroglyphic text, and by the way, the hieroglyphs are the names, is the word that was given to those writings by the Greeks. The Greeks were the first people to come in touch with the ancient Egyptians. So all the terms that you are used to are Greek terms. But you know what the ancient Egyptian called the writing? They called it Medunitcher, that is to say, the words of deities, the words of gods. So the text that you see behind Anubis mummifying the pharaoh here is what we call the funerary texts. The funerary texts actually are all about your guidebook to a life of eternity. Everything that you're going to face during your trip through the 12 hours of the night following the sun god, the evil spirit that will try to hinder you, and the god spirits that will be there to help you. Passwords that you were going to pronounce in order to pass from one stage to another, whether it's from 1 hour to another, whether it's from one gate to another, prayers that you will have to say, natures that you're going to assume, for example, a serpent in order to be able to cross the desert, and a falcon in order to cross the mountain, until you finally reach a life of eternity, once and for all, to unite with your ancestors, the stars. Can we move to the other one, please? The funeral. All your life you prepared for your death, and yet, as usual, the death was a very sad event for your loved ones. When you are dead, you are being mummified, and of course, mummification, just like everything in the world, it was the good mummification only the rich could afford. All the mummies that you see in museums belong to the rich ones. The mummification for the poorer was so simple that the mummies didn't really last for you to see. But you would be mummified by the priest over 40 days, and then when your body is ready, in the first register up there, you see the coffin and the sarcophagus where the body is being put on a boat. Actually, the boat was then just like the symbol of the means of transportation. Because in the beginning of our history, whenever we wanted to move from one place to another, we didn't even know the wheel back then. So it would be always on a boat on the waters of the River Nile. So to transport something, you just have to have a boat. So this is what you have. It is a boat, but it is not sailing. Actually, it's being carried on the shoulders of members of the family in order to take it to where the necropolis is. And then in front, you can see some bulls. Those bulls are going to be sacrificed in a certain ritual in which they will be evil and they will be slaughtered, and guess the burial. So it's like the last banquet, the last meal that the deceased will have with his loved ones. And then right in front of the bull, you will discern members of the family. Actually, you have the ladies in front of you. They are mourning the deceased. What they will be doing, they will be hitting their chests in order to mourn him. Can you see well the scene in front of us? I think it's my connection. And they will be taking dirt from the ground and put it on their heads. Actually, they were professional wailers, the professional mourners that will be hired in order to cry and shout and scream when everybody around will be counting the merits of the deceased one, just like we do nowadays. And then at the dawn, the procedure of the opening of the mouth will start. 72 steps. What is the opening of the mouth? There will be a priest, a superior priest, because this is for the elite of the priest, who will be performing a certain certain series of rituals on the mummy. He will hold some kind of a crochet, a dummy tool, and he will put it on the mouth and say, I open your mouth so that you can speak again. I open your mouth so that you can breathe again, drink again, and so on. And then he will go to your nose, cover your different senses, cover your different organs. In other words, he will be giving you life once again before you're buried once and for all inside. To the extreme left of the first register, you start to see the offering bearers bringing all the goods, the foods that will be buried with the deceased. And of course, the text underneath gives you account of the deceased, some kind of his biography, who he was, what occupation he held, and so on. And then he will be buried once and for all inside the tomb. If we can move to the next picture, please. The judgment. Ever since the beginning of our history, the Egyptians believed that they will be judged when they reach that life of eternity. There will be all those steps in which they will need the help of the good spirits, the divinities, in order to reach eternity. But before they reach eternity, on the portal of eternity, they will meet with Osiris, the god of the underworld, on his throne. The ancient Egyptians believed that every pharaoh during his lifetime on earth, he is equated with Horus, the falcon god, and after his death, he becomes the ruling Osiris of the underworld. And when a new pharaoh dies, the older one, will leave his seat, his throne in the underworld, and go and joins a whole chain of Osirian pharaohs in the underworld. And the new one will start to become the ruler of the current underworld. So what you're going to do, you're going to go with your heart on your hand. They believe that all your thoughts came from your heart. So it's the heart that counts, whether you are sinful or not, whether you're good or bad. You can see the deceased wearing white linen. He is being held by, his hand is being held by Anubis, the jackal. And on one side of the balance, there is his heart. To the left is the heart, and to the other side, this is the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at is the goddess of justice. She has the feather of ostrich as an emblem on top of her head. And why is that? Because the ancient Egyptians thought that all the feathers of the ostrich, all the threads of the ostrich feather are the same in size. They don't go from one side to another just like the other ones. So to them, they evoked justice, so it became the emblem of the goddess of justice. And your heart is supposed to be lighter than the feather, because it's not the heart that we weigh, it's the sins in the heart that we weigh. But before, can you see all the divinities, the frieze of divinities up there? These are different divinities of Egypt, 42 of them, according to the last version, when Egypt was divided into 42 provinces. You will stand in front of each of them and you will pronounce what we call the negative confession. Why do we call them negative confession? Because you attest that you did not kill anybody. You did not dirty the water of the Nile. You did not commit the act of adultery. You did not cause the orphan to cry, and so on and so forth. And once you attest to all of that, they'll weigh your heart. Hopefully your heart will be lighter, and then you will go to enjoy a life of eternity in the ever-field green of Osiris that they call Diaru. The thing is that, you see this character, this legendary animal, he's third crocodile, third hippopotamus, and third panther. He's a monster ready to devour your heart in case you prove otherwise, in case your heart is heavier than the feather. But according to every single funerary text and funerary representation, it ends with a happy ending that your heart is lighter and you get to enjoy heaven with all the good people of the afterworld. Can we see the next picture, please? Like they say in Latin, you give what you want to receive. The story goes, or the idea behind God is that the Egyptians found around them a lot of things whether they cannot really control. So someone must control, someone must know how to control that word. So they imagined there were all those divinities. And by the way, some scholars, including, for example, James Henry Breasted, the renowned American scholars, believe that the Egyptians were monotheists ever since the beginning of their history. They believed, or they saw the idea of so many divinities just for the simple people to understand. They never worshipped the cow, they never worshipped the falcon. One cow will be chosen to reside in the temple in which they believe that the spirit of the goddess Hathor will reside. And the same thing for the falcon, but all the cows will be outside, will be slaughtered, they will be eaten, they will be working hard in the fields and so on. So it is just the idea behind the kindness of the cow, the motherhood of the cow, that they incorporated in their gods, and they wanted to approach the idea of this goddess, the cow goddess Hathor, in order to assure the subjects that they can count on motherhood feelings and protections being given to them through the cow goddess Hathor. So, for example, in the pyramid texts, the pharaoh would say, talk to God and say, the one and only, the first and the last. He is giving reference to one and only God, and not many divinities. But anyway, every God will be residing in his temple. Temples for the ancient Egyptians. Please tell me, Ophir, when you want me to finish up quickly or so, because of the time. Actually, the temple. Are we okay with time?
Yes, yes, we're fine with time. A few more minutes is no problem, Wafika.
Okay, so you're most welcome. So the temple is where the god resides, is where the god was given offerings. You wanted to have a good crop, you want to have a good flood. This is exactly what you give to the divinities, and these are all the scenes that you see on the walls of the temples of ancient Egypt. So you can see here actually the king making offering to the cow goddess Hathor seated on her seat. If you can see the next one, please. This is the procession of the feast of the Opet festival that took place in Luxor, and as usual, you can see carried on the shoulders of, and the boat is decorated to both sides by the emblem of the god Amun-Ra of Luxor, Thebes, the ram. On top of that boat, there will be a chapel inside that will be the statue of the god. Because you do not get to go as a commoner, you do not get to go inside the temple to see your god. The god will go out and you can see him just passing by, uniting all the subjects together. And please, if you feel like asking any questions, I'm there to answer you. Would you like to discuss any certain subject?
Wonderful, Wafika. First of all, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction to the ancient Egypt. And we did have a couple of questions. First of all, there was somebody who sent me a question by email a few days ago regarding the use of water when building the pyramids. Is that person with us? I can't find the email anywhere here.
Yes.
So there was somebody that was asking if they used water for the when they were building the pyramids, and maybe you could address that a little bit, because I don't remember the specific question, unfortunately.
Yeah, actually, we have the typical theory, like the picture I showed you of the people pulling those blocks and building the pyramid. But many scholars of engineering and architecture, they disagree. They say, no way, physically speaking, you cannot build the pyramid with those very simple tools. So actually, you will find it's a very interesting video on the YouTube. And he shows you, he makes a small model. He says, because everything took place around the Nile and they used the water of the river Nile on everything. So actually, you will build some kind of, you can say, and then you will have 3 locks. you will bring your very heavy blocks, and you're going to attachments are filled with canals to the mouth of those
sounds like
tubes. If you see it on the tube, it's, pardon me?
I'm just saying your Wi-Fi is a little bit on the weaker side there. So if you could repeat the last two sentences.
Okay. Okay, so you're going to build a vertical tube, and you're going to fill this vertical tube with water. And then you will have a canal upon which you're going to put the blocks, and you're going to tie underneath the blocks big sacks filled with air. And you're going to remove them all the way until the mouth of the tube, the bottom of the tube. And then you have 3 locks along the tube. So you're going to open the first lock, and then the water will rise up there with the block, and then you will close the lock, and then you will take it to the other level, and then you will do that the same thing to the other level. I mean, when you see it in the diagram he has prepared, he actually made a small model. It will be very clear. Yes, this is one of the theories how they try. I mean, it's an engineer, and I think he's a British engineer, and he was giving one of the ideas how Egyptians could have been building pyramids. They say, and physicists, they say it is impossible to build the pyramid according to like the typical traditional theory that we have all studied. You will find it on YouTube. It is very interesting. Yes. Is it okay?
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
You're most welcome.
Also, I wanted to, there's a question here from Nachliel. Nachliel, are you with us by chance?
Yes, I am. I am with you.
Okay, so you were asking, you're in, good evening, you're where, in Jerusalem or in Israel?
I'm in Jerusalem. Yeah, there's this question that's been bothering me for a long time. I just never understood it. You mentioned in the beginning that there's the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, and then there's the double crown. So you didn't go into that so much, but I was curious, like, since Narmer, since the unification, we still find many statues and pictures with pharaohs that wear one or the other or both. So like, what's the rule? Like, when do you wear what? How does that work?
Well, for example, if the pharaoh is visiting a temple in the north, he will wear the crown of the north. If he's visiting a temple in the south, he'll wear a crown in the south. And then it doesn't really have a rule. Sometimes the pharaoh will be wearing on one side a red crown, on the other side a white crown, maybe on a piece a red crown, on another piece, but they will always sort of go together because it was his way to assert his unity and his rule on both north and south. And the best thing, I mean, it's to sum it all up, he wears the double crown to tell you, I'm ruling on both north and south together. And there are, of course, many other number of crowns that will be worn by the pharaohs. For example, that will be made out of linen. There will be the Kheperish leather crown that will be worn in certain, actually in wars on the battlefield, and there will be the Kheperish crown for the wars, and the Atef crown of Osiris, a multitude of crowns. As I told you, we had ample time, and we like to elaborate and complicate matters a little bit. But definitely the red crown and the white crown, or both of them together, was to say over and over again, all Egypt is mine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wafika. Thank you, Wafika. And we have a question here from Harriet from North Carolina. Harriet, are you with us? Okay, so Harriet was asking before, I don't know if she's still with us or not, but she's asking, why is the region, the Nile region, no longer fertile?
It is no longer fertile because of the building of the modern dams. In order to control water, and under the pretext of cultivating the land more than once a year, because you know this is the way it went. The water came, you waited until it recedes, then you would spread your seeds, and you had one crop. Even the ancient Egyptians said they managed to cultivate the land more than once by making reservoirs. Ali, the founder of modern Egypt, did the same thing. But I mean, with modernization and technology, and when we are the British occupation, they sold us the idea of inaugurated, and then it was hired 2 times in order to keep water and use it to cultivate the land more than once, and at the same time, the harm of the flood. Even the ancient Egyptians kept the harm by the flood by building walls around everything. I mean, it would have been much better for us not to build those very drastically changing the natural phenomenon of the flood dams. And then, of course, 1952 came Nasser. That was a disaster, actually, because what Nasser did is that he had this theory of changing Egypt overnight from an agricultural country to an industrial one. He had the slogan of fabricating everything from the needle to the rocket. You don't go, economically speaking, you don't go this way about it. Excuse me. So he wanted a lot of electricity. He wanted to build the dam, and the United Nations made the study, and they said it was not feasible. So he had the conspiracy theory forged automatically, and he said it's the Americans who do not want Egypt to advance in order not to become a power. And he went to the Russians, who actually fooled him and made the project of the high dam. They stopped completely once and for all the flood of coming. We don't see the floods anymore. All the waters of the River Nile is kept behind the Lake Nasser, behind the high dam. It's a disaster because we need to use artificial fertilizers. It's a disaster because the level of salt in the water is becoming so high because the soil is not washed anymore. It's a disaster because all the monuments of Egypt are being threatened by the subterranean water that was multiplied by 24. So you have the level of water rising, threatening the temple and all the buildings that are found in the valley. You know, the theory of communicative vases, when you have a big water reservoir and a smaller one, automatically the water will infiltrate from the big reservoir, which is the Lake Nasser, to the River Nile, and the whole valley will be subject to high water table.
Wonderful. So Wafika, thank you again very much.
You're most welcome.
And first of all, you have a holiday coming up, the Ramadan. Yeah, we spoke about it last week. So Ramadan Kareem to you and to your family.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And I wanted to take 3 minutes from those that are still with us and interested to tell you a little bit about what it means, you know, a tour of Egypt. I hope you can all see this here. Just wanted to tell you in like literally 3 minutes of what exactly is a tour, you know, how the tour looks like. And so what we have here is we have let me see here. So we have, you can see the map of Egypt over here. And let me just see here, display settings, duplicate slideshow. Okay. All right. So this is the map of Egypt. And you can see that the tour starts and ends in Cairo at the top, a little bit south of Alexandria. And there's a couple days of touring in Cairo. On the next tours, we have 3 days of touring in Cairo, actually. 1 day is to the pyramids and to Memphis and Saqqara, which is to the west of Cairo. We have 1 day to the old city of Cairo and the synagogue and the churches and the Muhammad Ali Mosque, which are all on the east side of the Nile. And we have also to the a little bit outside of Cairo, we have the Zabaleen area, which are garbage collectors, and it's a fascinating place to visit. And then from Cairo, we fly down to Luxor. And in Luxor, you actually board the cruise, and the cruise line sort of becomes your hotel for the next couple of days in Luxor, or actually for the next 4 days in Egypt or on the cruise. And while you're touring from Luxor to Aswan is the cruise. And once the cruise is over, you have the option of going down to Abu Simbel, which is probably considered the most magnificent temple in Egypt, and then come back to Cairo, or you could just fly back from Aswan to Cairo. So this is what the map pretty much looks like, with the flights being in blue and the cruise being in orange. And this is a view from my hotel, the Intercontinental, which is the hotel that I love using in Egypt, in Cairo. It's located right on the Nile, and you can see that it's right across the island. What you're seeing here in front of you is the island of Zamalek, which is has restaurants and residential buildings, but this is where the hotel is located. This is a nighttime view of from the terrace overlooking the Nile. Cairo is a nonstop city. 3 a.m. people are honking and moving around and stuff like that. This is what it looks like in the daytime from the Intercontinental. And I took a picture of my room here just so that you guys would see what the hotel looks like. It's considered to be, I would say, a moderate 5-star hotel. It's not the super deluxe, and it's also not a 4-star. It's a nice, good, moderate hotel in the middle. And this is what the cruise looks like. We have, as you can see, it starts from Luxor in the north, ends in Aswan in the south. You have a little bit of touring, on the east of Luxor, a little bit of touring on, which is the Temple of Karnak. West of Luxor is the Valley of the Kings and the Queens, all the tombs and the statues that they built for them. And then you start heading south to Edfu, the Temple of Edfu, and eventually in Aswan, where you've got the Temple of Komombo, and you've got the Temple of Philae on an island, and you've got the Aswan Dam, and of course the visit to Abu Simbel. And this is what I took a picture. You know, every Monday, all the cruise ships, they leave from Luxor heading towards Aswan. Every one of these cruise ships is a world of its own, completely different levels of service, completely different types of rooms. The cruise ship that I use, if you want to look it up, would be it's called the Sonesta. I think it's the Moon Goddess or the Star Goddess, if I'm not mistaken. And this is what a room looks like. This is what my room looks like. It's got a little area with a bedroom, and then a little area. It's sort of like a junior suite at a hotel. You can see the window, and this is like the little sitting area. And the best part of it, of course, is that you also have your little balcony that you can look at the beautiful sunsets or the sun. I don't remember if this was a sunset or a sunrise, but the view is absolutely magnificent. The food is fantastic. Here we have, we took a felucca ride on the Nile. This is a picture of feluccas on the Nile, and we did that. And unfortunately, we ran out of wind in the middle. And also, as a final touch, Diana Spanier, Diana, are you still with us, by the way?
Beautiful.
Yeah, so Diana Spanier, who was on the last tour, she drew this, Diana, shalom, there you are, okay. And she drew this absolutely magnificent drawing.
It's a painting.
It's a painting, I'm sorry.
Beautiful.
And absolutely marvelous. And I put it on Facebook. Lots of people loved it. So if anybody wants a copy of this, Diana can decide, you know, how much you're selling them for, Diana. I'd put it in the millions. All right. Wonderful. So, and by the way, in the last night after the cruise and everything, the idea is to go back to Cairo and spend a night at or a few hours at the Meridian Cairo Airport, which is like smack in the airport, from where we can very easily walk over to the terminal and take the flight back. And this is a picture of the last group that we had in October of 2019. And I hope that the next tour I have in October of 2020 will actually go, but we'll see. I have no idea where things are heading right now. We're sort of like in a holding pattern.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, it will. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again. Does anybody have any more questions or anything at all that they'd like to discuss further? Wonderful. So next week we'll have another lecture, and I'm hoping that our friend Dawit from Ethiopia will be able to will have a good internet connection, that he'll be able to make a presentation. Ethiopia is just unbelievably beautiful, as Egypt and Israel and Jordan, and so I'm very hopeful that he'll have the Wi-Fi connection. Ethiopia can be a little spotty sometime, and if not, then we'll figure something else for somebody else. Wafika, what I'd like to ask you, if possible, if you don't mind, sometime maybe in the next few weeks, you could do like a Egypt in general, about the different temples, that we would see along the cruise and stuff like that, just so that people could see the absolute magnitude and beauty of these places. I would love to see that.
Sure, I'll do. You just let me know when you want it, and I'll have it ready.
Wonderful.
Okay. Can I ask a question, Wafika?
Please.
Yeah. Wafika, sorry.
Yes.
First of all, do you have any regulations about Ramadan? Because in Israel, they closed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Mufti. Anything
yes.
about that?
Same thing for us. The mosques are no longer open for prayer, because you see they're very crowded, and even they call for the prayer, the azan. When they say the azan, they will end with pray in your houses. Otherwise, it will be very dangerous. The pandemic can be definitely transmitted. And in Ramadan, after the iftar, between the sunset prayer and the night prayer, we have a very long series of prayer called Tarawih that will take over an hour and a half, maybe, depends from one mosque to another. So actually, it is very important, to keep people at home and not open, and not open for prayer.
Okay, Ramadan Kareem.
Allahu Akram. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Ramadan
Thank
Kareem.
You so much.
Ramadan Kareem, and to everybody, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Wonderful seeing you.
Bye-bye. Wonderful seeing you too, all of you. Thank you.